No mullet.
No mallet, yeah. I'm about to be a father, and it's my life ambition to actually grow a mullet on my new child, so heaven help him. Anyway, that's aside. Cool, thank you so much. My name is Darren Hampton. I am the GM of Digital and CRM for EMEA, and I'm acutely aware that that is probably the least sexiest title here on the agenda today. So forgive me for that, but alas, I'm not going to be talking too much about digital and ad tech. I think there's been some very smart people talking about some smart subject matter. But rather, I'm going to talk about some ads and chicken. You guys okay with that? Cool. Okay, awesome. In keeping with the theme, I thought it would be a good opportunity for us to look at Nando's. It's recently celebrated 30 years last year, and there are certain principles of Nando's marketing that have stayed the same over those 30 years, and there's certain things that have changed as the context within which we operate changes, and that being South Africa. And all of us know here that South Africa is certainly not a boring place to live in, right? So, to do that, I'm quite aware that I'm going to try and summarize 30 years worth of marketing within 15 minutes. So I'll do my best to do that. So let's cut the small talk and get straight into it. 1987, two of Nando's founders, Robbie Brosen and Nando Duarte, frequented a little Portuguese restaurant in the heart of Johannesburg South in Rosettenville. The restaurant was called Chicken Land. And that's a little image of what the restaurant looked like inside just after they had purchased it. And Chicken Land sold everything from steak to prawns to pregos. And of course, what really tickled their fancy was this idea of peri-peri chicken. And while most of normal people would simply just go back if they liked the product, Robbie and Fernando decided to buy the place. So they bought Chicken Land and decided to rename it Nando's. And the ambition of that was to look at putting their life savings into starting a new business. Now, at that time, that was a pretty ballsy move. And we'll get more into that. Today, if you look at 30 years later, 23 countries across the world, 1,300 restaurants, and this is a glimpse of what Nando's interior looks like today, probably say it was a gamble worth taking, right? These are some examples of restaurants that are currently in South Africa, from Bryanston through to Savoy and Pietermaritzburg. So, yes, we're talking about marketing, but why the hell are we talking about the genesis of the brand? Why are we talking about the start of the brand? And like a chicken and egg, the two cannot go separate. They cannot be separated. The start and the genesis and where it is from is fundamental to the personality of the brand today. And like you and I, our personality, our characteristics and traits and behaviors are fundamentally based on where we come from, our environment, our family, how we were brought up. And that was important because in 1987, South Africa was a very volatile place. If you read the news headlines, it was a myriad of headlines which were protests, which were train bombings. There was sanctions placed on the country, which meant that economically we were isolated from the rest of the world. So these weren't exactly ideal conditions to start a business. But Fernando and Robbie decided that now was the time to do so. So why that is important is because I think that layer of courage, and it's something that Andy was talking about earlier, is at the heart of the brand and the DNA of Nando's. And the expression of that through marketing is a byproduct. So let's talk about the journey. My wife and I recently went and watched Bohemian Rhapsody. Has anybody else watched Bohemian Rhapsody? Yeah, it was good, right? It was awesome. And what was really insightful about that movie was that, we all know the greatest hits of Queen, and, throughout the movie it was Queen, the band. But it was interesting to see that at different times, there were different influences which impacted the music, right? So there was orchestral area where the likes of Bohemian Rhapsody came out. There was a stadium and sort of anthem theme to a lot of their music at a certain time. So with music like We Are the Champions and We Will Rock You. And that was really true for Nando's as well. Because what was happening at the time and the context within which they were operating really affected not only what we spoke about, but how we spoke about it as well. We always kept that Nando's cheeky tone and that Nando's tonality into it, but the subject matter of what we addressed was hugely impacted by what we as South Africans were going through at the time. So if we look back, the early days, late 80s, early 90s, Nando's marketing was really started off being quite edgy and took on current topics which were happening at that time. The time at which that was happening, you know that South Africa was a very conservative time. So, music was being censored, media was being censored. We didn't have YouTube videos of Marlies riding into a pole. But, these were still behind. These type of issues weren't necessarily, non-existent from the mindset of people. People still thought about these things. So a lot of the ads were addressing those subconscious topics that people had but weren't consciously talking about. And it was the only brand at the time that was doing that. And that sort of started this journey of being quite edgy. We spoke about things that happened socially. It wasn't just about politics. It was very much a social angle to it. And it was all about the product. Obviously, being a new brand, people needed to know what peri peri was about, and people needed to know that we were flame-grilled peri peri chicken. So a lot of the context in the ads were about chicken themselves. Then we moved through to the mid to late 90s. And this is where really South Africa's Nando started getting the reputation as being a political commentator. Because a lot of the subject matter that we tackled within our ad campaigns were politically angled. And purely at the time, that's what South Africa was talking about. That was the hot topic within the news headlines, within the daily conversation. So it was difficult to avoid that. It was met with a degree of success, but during that time, there were a lot of failures. One of the risks and one of the challenges with addressing a topic like politics is that it's hugely polarizing. It's very difficult to encapsulate a sentiment of what South Africans as a whole thought about, because either you thought about this way or you thought about that way. So we landed ourselves into a lot of trouble over that time. Again, some successful and some not so successful. It became less about the product and more about building the brand. And again, there were a lot of learnings about that, is at the end of the day, we needed to sell chicken. And from a business point of view, there were highs and lows over that period, which impacted the way that we marketed. And then the noughties. The rise of the internet, people started to become a lot more connected, particularly in South Africa as well. National boundaries were starting to be eradicated purely because of the access of travel and the idea that people were starting to move between countries, which was great because there was this cultural convergence. And these were sort of topics that were going on at the time and people felt strongly about, both in a positive way and in a negative way. It created a lot of tension, particularly with the sense of nationalism. So a lot of our commentary shifted away from politics and tried to look at addressing those type of emotions and sentiment that people were feeling at that time. So you'll see that in a couple of the ads. Food became more of the hero. And again, it's a learning from what didn't work, in that at the end of the day, we're a brand that sells delicious chicken, and we need to ensure that the focus has stayed on that. And that factored a lot of the media budget as well. A lot of the ads that people remember and iconic Nando's ads are in reality a small portion of media and focus. At the end of the day, retail is what keeps the numbers ticking. So I'm going to show a couple of ads. They're not always necessarily the ones that everybody knows. It's sort of a mixture of that. But while you're going through them, I'm going to go through them quite quickly. You can sort of, in your mind, place as to what era the ads were featured. Right.
It's been a secret for hundreds of years. A secret brought to Africa by our Portuguese ancestors. This closely guarded secret is the mystery behind our delicious flame-grilled peri-peri chicken. Now, at last, we're ready to show the world the secret of how Nando's chicken is made.
You can see the age demographic. If you'll see that first time, like, okay. But again, like I say, looking back at sort of the timeline, very much chicken jokes, a conservative South Africa. So while this nowadays doesn't look that edgy, at that time, that landed in some hot water.
Daily grilling, putting politicians on the spot with spooky swimming gala.
Old political parties versus the new diversity. Can the leopard change his spots?
My party used to be for whites only, but it has decided to become more representative. We are all equal.
Is that the official new party manifesto?
I don't know. They don't let me into the meetings.
Vote Nando's quarter chicken and regular chips, just R13.50.
Yeah. Again, you can place the era, right? Political, it's a lot of people were thinking these things, and at the time, to sit back, and as South Africans, we are notoriously good at laughing at ourselves. And so if you can bring that out, that's where we start to find the golden nuggets.
You know what's wrong with South Africa? All you foreigners. You must all go back to where you came from. You Cameroonians, Congolese, Pakistanis, Somalis, Ghanaians, and Kenyans. And of course, you Nigerians. And you, Europeans. Let's not forget all you Indians and Chinese. Even you, Afrikaners. Back to Swaziland for you Swatis, Lesotho for you Sothos, Tswanas, Vendas, Zulus, everybody.
Real South Africans love diversity. That's why we have introduced 2 more items, new peri-crusted wings and delicious chinchado and chips.
That's at the plight of xenophobic attacks, a very tense, a very volatile time. And when you actually look at it, just the nature of South Africa and the fruit salad of cultures and ideologies, we're all foreigners essentially. And so that was an interesting time.
You can't just be passing.
I'll blow you. I'll blow you, Mama.
In fact, I'll blow all of you, okay? I'll blow you. Everybody get down. Get down.
So that again, all of us as South Africans, when you're stuck on the M1 and you see the blue light brigade, that was a general sentiment. It wasn't conscious. It was, it was in our subconscious, but it was something that we all, as a majority, had the same view on. We'd be like, yeah, that is irritating. And then the subtle hints at the end is, it's just another day. Sometimes you have to laugh at ourselves. Cool. So let's move over to 2016 to now. And those principles have remained fairly consistent, but the time within South Africa is slightly different. And so that's mandated a slight shift in how we structure our messaging. Firstly, it is about food, and like I say, we are a retail and we are a chicken business, so it's crucial that we portray that in its best light. So a lot of the ads that you have seen over the last 3 years, the end result has ended up being in a restaurant. Or the food itself has been a lot more of a prominent feature within the narrative of the ad. Not in every ad, but it's a conscious decision going through it. What hasn't changed is that integrating that consumer truth with the creative idea. And how do we dig below the surface to what's not obvious? And asking, what bothers, excites, worries, and South Africans believe in, and how do we take that on? I think nowadays the digital space has allowed us to not only talk to people, but talk with people. And again, if you're a brand that airs and shares the views of South Africans, you have to know what you talk. You have to have credibility within that, and the ability to khuluma nabantu and to talk to people is a crucial part of that, and I think often overlooked, particularly in the community management side. Firing up, I think the last thing is we've instilled a sense of optimism. So, while ads are great at highlighting a specific issue, if we can leave people up on the up and instill that level of South African pride, because we're a South African brand and we're hugely optimistic about the country, how do we leave people with that? So I'll show you a quick ad during 2017 where the scale of corruption and state capture was starting to be shown.
South Africans can do anything. We can end hundreds of years of oppression. And we can get lost lovers back in 2 days. We can lose our minds. And we can change them. We can make it. Oh, but we can fake it. We can forgive. And we can be forgiven. Right? We can lose our money and we can get some of it back. We can get new finance ministers faster than we can get new eyebrows. We can perform miracles and make miraculous recoveries. We can believe in superheroes, but some things, unbelievable. We can feel doomed and then be on top of the world. In South Africa, we've always fixed our shit.
Hope we have enough cash.
And we can fix our shit again.
No, man. Why is this thing so big? Okay, I'm driving. Who's on the drive? I got the keys. What about me? No, sorry for you.
Cool. Right. I am conscious of time, so just quickly whiz through some of the other examples. We tend to focus on the TV commercials, but the other media channels are a crucial part of that, and it's not always about the big TV narrative. The Write My Name campaign, as I'll go through, everybody guys heard about the Write My Name campaign. Essentially, a general view that we as South Africans are very proud of our name because that's where we're from. It defines who we are. And it's such a mix of names that it is a lot more important than particularly other countries. Yet we use US and Chinese-based software which don't recognize South Africans' names as being a non-mistake. You write your name and there's that little red line underneath. So the Kolisas and the Kobus and the Jabulanis, all of that was registered as a mistake. So that's a general sentiment that people didn't actively share, but it's something that people felt. So the Write My Name campaign aimed to address that by creating a database of names that people could update their platforms with. Some digital examples in the social commentary space. Again, everyone's aware, so I'll go through it quite quickly. That's a Wrap was when Robert Mugabe was essentially ended his tenure, and now's the time is after Cyril's first State of the Nation. Again, that level of optimism. It wasn't about bashing individuals, it was about showcasing, yes, now is the time for a healthy change and to go forward. It's also that cheeky tone is angled within the retail space, particularly within products as well. It's not obvious humor, but it's insightful. And lastly, within the app. So we actually put this billboard up where there were roadblocks. So if you don't know the translation, it means now the police can buy their own drinks. And I think that's to showcase just the range of marketing that we focus on. I think if there's a thought to end off with, it's when you listen to Queen's Greatest Hits album, you know the greatest hits, but there are plenty B-sides and things that didn't make that. And the only reason they got to the greatest hits is because they experimented with things and tried different things, very much in line with what Andy was saying. And with as many successes, there are plenty failures. People either forget it or it's just ignored. So go for it. Cool.